In this episode of Bros Do Science, we had Dr. Jose Antonio from sunny South Florida. So, bro, do you even science? Bros do science. Dr. Jose Antonio is an assistant professor in Nova Southeastern University. He's the CEO and co-founder of the ISSN. He's an amazing person. I know him personally, and literally with his background, he's a really humble, really intelligent man. Knows his stuff. We went through high protein diets, where Dr. Jose Antonio is really one of the leading experts on high protein diets. Talked about protein overfeeding myths, what can happen if you're not getting enough protein, and also we had a glimpse about talking about some supplements and his latest genotype studies. So stay tuned and let's rock and roll. Thank you for helping us out. We've got almost a full house. I'm gonna try to do this. See you guys there.
Yay! It's good to see all of you.
Thank you for your time, and gonna rock and roll by starting and saying people who don't know you. I think it's gonna be one or two in the world about you and what you're up to.
So you want me to start?
Oh yeah.
Okay. And I assume people can see me because I only see your pretty face. I don't see anyone else's face.
What else do you want to see?
All right. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I live in South Florida. I am a associate professor at Nova Southeastern University. It's a private university right outside of Fort Lauderdale. I teach exercise physiology, a course in sports nutrition, and a course in research methods. And currently, my research focus, as you are already aware, probably, is on protein intake, high protein diets. We're going to do some follow-up studies looking at protein intake in women and how it affects bone mineral density. And also, I'm doing some other cool work on some genotype studies. So I'm currently at Nova Southeastern University. Also, I am the CEO and one of the co-founders of the International Society of Sports Nutrition. We've been around since 2003, and we have conferences throughout the world. In fact, we were just in London this past few months. And our goal is really to promote the science and application of sports nutrition. We believe that through proper if you learn the science and you learn how to implement the science, I think people both who are practitioners and also who are scientists, I think you'll get a better understanding of what sports nutrition should be like.
So you believe we have more accessibility in science in a way that we can translate it to the average Joe?
Yeah, in fact, if you go back just 10 or 15 years ago, there really was very little science in sports nutrition. It has grown rapidly. In fact, from our first year of ISSN, we had our first conference in 2004 to now it's 2016. It's not even the same field. There's so much that seems to come out that's brand new, and it makes it exciting. I mean, I always try to get my students to, if you want to pursue a career in science, the field of sports nutrition is the one to go to. I mean, if you want to get a PhD or earn a PhD, this field is wide open for a lot of people. There's so much that needs to be done. I mean, it's fun, it's fast paced, and I think, in general, people love it.
Exactly, and you're doing a great job on it. And we can go through. You said about the presentation you've got for us. And
yes.
Majorly because most of us are in the chiropractic field, and we have to do with athletes besides average Joe. So we need to know exactly how to address nutritional advice or how to implement an injury, not only adjusting or doing MSK, but nutritional advice, and many times being more open-minded.
Yes, absolutely.
So, what do you have for us?
Well, okay, you want me to go through my presentation? I got lots of information. You ready?
Awesome. Yes.
Okay. Well, my presentation is entitled Protein Timing and Performance, and What I'm going to focus on is the last 3 or 4 years of research that I've done. And then I'm also going to touch a little bit on not just protein intake, but also issues related to timing, because I think this is also important. Now,
Exactly.
just a little bit, I thought I'd show you pictures of palm trees in Florida. So this is this is the university I'm at, Nova Southeastern University. In fact, the palm trees are always green. Nothing ever turns brown here. So I thought you'd like to know that, Rocco, because I know you want to move to Florida. Now, let's talk about kids. And the question I got that I ask people is, it safe for kids to supplement? And I use this really as a case study because my own kids, I have my own kids that they're now 16 years old, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about them. So my daughters, they're fraternal twins, right? Their names are Brooke and Brandy. My wife and I started training them when they were young. So these are pictures of them doing parachute sprints.
Can you share the presentation at the? This doesn't.
You don't see it?
Nope.
So you don't see that?
No.
Huh. Here, hold on. So you don't see this screen?
No.
Oh, okay. Hold on. Just a little glitch. Let's see here. You see that? Here, let me share a screen again.
Yeah.
Let's see. Start sharing screen.
And that's how live shows go.
That's right. Okay, let's. How about that?
And that's because you started saying about palm trees and stuff like that.
Okay. Well, okay, then I'll try not to mention palm trees too much. Okay. So, here's the palm trees. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Well, these are my kids right here. These are my kids. Just a little bit of story about my wife and my family, and we're really involved in athletics. Now, you'll see here, I don't know if you can see a picture of my wife on a bicycle. She competes in duathlons, run bike races, things like that. She's actually doing a what's called an aquathon this next weekend, where it's it's a swim bike race. My kids here, they're 16 years old. They compete in track and field. The one in the bright yellow is a middle distance runner. The one in the blue is a sprinter. And so we've been training them since they were quite little. And there's me. I compete in paddling races. In fact, I have a race in about 2 weeks. It's a 8-mile race, which is 12-kilometer race around an island in Florida. So a lot of fun. So we engage in athletics a lot. I work with a lot of athletes. And so my kids, I always say my kids are my best example of the kinds of things I do. So just to give you an example, this is my kids when they were young, doing parachute sprints, box jumps, things like that. You see my daughter here doing ladder drills, med ball throws. We started them very young, lifting weights, doing sprints and things like that. So you can never be too young to start this stuff. Now, the idea, in fact, let me fix this little. The idea that kids should not take supplements is a bit of a myth. In fact, if you see a picture, here's my kids when they were little. Here they are playing softball. They played high-level softball up until a few years ago, and now they transitioned to track and field. And here's my daughter. This is the final of a 100-meter dash. This is in South Florida. In fact, South Florida produces some of the fastest sprinters in the world, not just in the state, in the world. And she gets her butt kicked, but hey, you know what? At least she's competing. And my daughter's a good middle distance runner. She's one of the better ones at her school. So that's kind of cool. So we've worked with them in terms of supplementation and things like that. Now, I want to show you their diet. This is what my daughter Brandy eats, and you'll notice she's on. Would you consider that high protein? That's close there. It's close, right?
Not RDA talking, or are you asking me?
Definitely way above the RDA. It's definitely way above the RDA.
Yeah, maybe.
But so my daughter is already much higher than the RDA. My other daughter, she actually has the funniest diet. She has her protein days and she has her carbohydrate days. And my advice to her is just, could you eat more protein and fat, please? That's all I ask. Now, here's what's interesting. Same environment, same genetics, yet the one who eats like crap, Brooke, she's much taller. She's 5'9" or 175 centimeters. The one who eats really well is actually shorter. She's 5'4" or 162 centimeters. Yet it's the same environment. They get the same training. Yet genetics, sometimes you just can't beat genetics. And for whatever reason, my one daughter is better genetically. So, question I would ask is, let's solve the mystery of high protein diets. My uncle, Robert Stoner, this is him when he was 66 years of age. He was actually the first person that got me interested in exercise.
Jesus,
and I remember, and this is what's interesting, he got me interested because, not because he was a bodybuilder, but he actually taught me, he was my first karate instructor, and I love the martial arts. So I was fascinated by, I want to learn karate, I want to be Bruce Lee, blah, 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 blah. But you know what? I learned very quickly that, I learned a little bit of karate, and there's me with I had hair and I have shorts there. But here's what's interesting. I soon realized that if you're second best in the martial arts, it means someone's beating your butt. And I was like, you know what? I don't really like getting beat up, so maybe I should find something else. So I started lifting, and I noticed that guys who lift would eat a lot of these amino acids. They'd eat a lot of protein. So if all this protein is bad, why do guys who work out eat so much of it? And that's really sort of the question that, we asked a lot. So the question is this: what exactly is high? What's a high amount of protein? And this is what you see in the literature. Anything more than 35% of your calories, anything more than the RDA, or anything more than 1.2 grams per kilo. And I'll tell you this right now to your audience, that is flat out wrong. And in fact, you can quote me, you can post this on Facebook, Twitter, whatever. These definitions are wrong. In fact, these are low. This is low protein. This is like nothing. This is like for a mosquito. So,
well,
I always
I've got
say,
a guy that weighs 150 kilos here, so imagine.
Whoa, 150 kilos. Wow, that's a lot of kilos.
He's a big man. He's tall and big.
So here's what I'd say. What is high for fit people is you should at least be at 2.2 grams per kilo or above. To me, 2.2 grams per kilo should be your baseline. You shouldn't be below that. That's for all athletes, whether you're an endurance athlete, strength power athlete. You should be at 2.2 grams per kilo minimum. I tell that to distance runners. I tell that to bodybuilders. I tell that to fighters. 2.2. Don't go below it. So here's the question I asked. One of overfeeding. And in fact, when I met with, I had one of my students in my lab. This was a few years back. And I said, he was a fairly big guy. And just out of the blue, I said, how much do you eat? How much protein do you eat? And he started rattling off what he ate. He's like, I eat this, I did, do shakes, I did, I eat burgers. I'm like, wow, you really eat a lot. And so we started calculating his protein intake. And I said, wow, you're actually almost 3 grams per kilo. I'm like, wow, that's pretty high. So it got me thinking, what if we just did a study where we got guys and girls who lifted weights and made them eat a lot of protein? What's going to happen? No one's ever done it, so let's just figure out what happens. But before I get to the punchline, let me give you some of the other overfeeding studies, because here's what's interesting. Despite the fact that there are hundreds of studies on diets, there are very few studies on overfeeding. In fact, there's probably 20 at the most on overfeeding, and almost all of them are on overfeeding carbs and fat. And let me show you a few of them. This was a study. This was done in 2010, and basically they just overfed people carbs and fat. And what happens when you overfeed people on carbs and fat? Well, you just get fat. Yeah, it's fascinating, huh? So I'm like, okay, so carbs and fat make you fat. And then this identical twin study, again, they overfeed them on carbs and fat. What happens? Well, interestingly, they gain fat, but they also gain some lean body mass. The overfeeding data is kind of interesting. When you overfeed carbs and fat, you either just get fatter or you get fatter and gain lean mass. And we know that if you just are in a caloric surplus, you're going to gain weight of some sort, and some of it might be lean body mass. So it's not going to be all fat, which is kind of interesting. So the question I would ask is this: what happens when you get trained subjects and all you do is change the total amount of protein they consume? That's it. We're just going to change one thing. And to me, science, you should proceed in these simple steps so you can start eliminating things. So this was our very first study that was published in this was published in Journal of the International Society of Sports Nutrition, where we looked at super high protein diets, 4.4 grams per kilo. And basically, they ate 5 times the RDA for 8 weeks. These were college kids that lifted weights. they consume twice their body weight in protein grams daily. Okay.
This is also the one that you had I think two people that were like 4.6 up to 6.
Actually, that was a third study. That was a third.
Okay.
Yeah. So again, we told them don't change your training. Just make sure you log it in, log your diet. We had them log their diet every day, and let's see what happens. So this is the amount of calories they ate. They ate about 800 more calories than the control group. They consumed 307 versus 138 grams of protein. And if you look at grams per kilo, we're talking 4.4 versus 1.8. So look at this, 4.4 versus 1.8. So even, here's the thing, even the control group is, some people consider that fairly high, depending on who you talk to. So to me, it's sort of moderate high. It's not high yet. But still, it's not like they're on a low protein diet. And this is the percentages. Some people like to see percentages. In a way, percentages are misleading because it's better to know exactly what you're consuming per unit body weight. Mm-hmm. So here's what we found. How many extra calories is this? Well, it's equal to about these many donuts, right? So if you can eat 4 donuts extra a day for 8 weeks, would you get fat, Rocco? Maybe not you.
Guess what?
You'd get lean, unlike me.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah.
So, but here's what happened.
I could inhale donuts.
What happened is nothing happened. That's the interesting part. There was no change in body composition, no change in lean body mass, no change in fat mass by just eating protein. So I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. It surprised me because, frankly, no one had ever done that high overfeeding study and just to see what happened. So I was like, okay, well, maybe it's hard to get fat on protein. So these are a few of my thoughts. If you look at some of the past work on high-protein diets, these are the numbers you tended to see. And I'll tell you this right now, those are not high-protein diets. 141 grams, 125 grams. These are, this one is kind of high, but that was only a 2-week study. Mine was the first true high-protein diet study, 4.35 grams per kilo. Below 4.4.
Usually, what you say, like 2.3 grams is like the basics.
Yeah, well, 2.3 is when high starts, but you got to be on it more than 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So from this one study, the moral of the story is this: eating twice your body weight in protein is really difficult. In fact, we had about 25% dropout rate. There were subjects who said, "I just can't do this. It's too hard. I can't eat this much." Yeah. And what's funny is a lot of the subjects complain of being hot, like the thermic effect of protein. They were hot, and they're like, I sweat all day, I'm uncomfortable. And it makes sense because of the thermic effect, because they're constantly sweating. And in general, what I found was, it is, to me, following this high a protein diet is almost as hard, maybe more difficult than following a ketogenic diet. It's difficult to comply with it just because of the volume. It's difficult. And in fact, how many chicken wings you have to eat to get this kind of protein? That's how many chicken wings. That's right. You'd have to eat a whole chicken every day, and it's like, oh my God, it's a Kentucky Fried Chicken to go out of business. So, from the first study, we found that if you just eat a lot of protein and do nothing, change nothing, nothing really happens. So, the second question is this. What happens when you get trained subjects consume a higher protein diet? In this case, we dropped it to 3 grams per kilo. We wanted it to be a little bit more doable. So we thought, okay, 3 grams per kilo will be easier than 4.4 grams. It's still high. And we switched their training so that it was more of a traditional bodybuilding training. So we're getting trained people, we're training them the way a bodybuilder would train, and now they're eating a high protein diet. Mm-hmm. And it was this study here. Let me see here. This was published in JISSN.
That's
a high protein diet. Yeah, 3.4 grams per kilo. We found, and this is sort of the punchline there, that it improves body composition in trained men and women. So these are the details. We compared baseline intake to a high protein intake of at least 3 grams per kilo. The subjects were all young, healthy men and women. The only difference was in the high protein group, they tended to have more years of training. And this is the diet data. Look at the calories. You're roughly 500 more calories in the high group versus the normal. Protein intake, 255 versus 167. And most importantly, grams per kilo, 3.4 grams per kilo versus 2.3. So here's what's cool. Even the normal protein group is actually eating high protein. So we're actually comparing high to really high. Because when people see 2.3, they're like, well, God, that's actually high. And they're absolutely right. It is high. And if you want to look at macro ratios, which some people like, I really don't care, to be honest, about ratios. But
You don't.
ratio. Yeah, it's like, hey, what's the ratio? Well, here's the ratio. The high protein group, 39% protein. The normal protein group, 32% protein. If you were to ask the average clinician if these are high protein diets, they'd be like, oh my God, both of them are crazy high. It's just crazy high. Something's
Hold your
going to...
kidneys.
That's right. Yeah. Mine, I already lost one yesterday. So here's what happened. Look at body composition. Let's focus on fat mass. The normal protein group dropped a little from 15.1 to 14.8 kilos, but the high protein group dropped from 13.5 to 11.9, a much bigger drop in fat mass. Fat-free mass both went up, but there was not a between group difference. Here's the individual data. Look where everyone's clustered here. Lean body mass gains are about the same for the normal group and for the high group. So they all tend to cluster in the same spot. Now, let's look at fat mass. Again, look at the normal protein group. They tend to cluster here. The higher protein group, they tend to cluster below the zero line, so they're actually losing more fat. The high protein group.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting that you can eat all these extra calories in the form of protein and then actually can promote the loss of fat. And this last slide here showing percent fat, change in fat. High protein group, their percent fat tends to drop more so than the normal protein group. So again, what are we seeing here? Well, we're seeing that in general, if you increase protein intake, change your training, you tend to lose body fat and gain lean body mass. Now, body fat seems to be affected more than lean body mass. So I put this up here to sort of explain, well, what's going on. Energy in versus energy out, where do the calories go?
Mm-hmm.
Now, you've seen this equation, energy in or food equals resting metabolic rate plus thermic effect of feeding plus non-exercise activity thermogenesis plus the thermic effect of exercise plus the change in body mass. Basically, if you eat more protein, you affect RMR, TEF, and NEAT, and actually even thermic effect of exercise. So protein is doing a lot of really cool things to your body. So in general, when people say, well, what is the secret of protein? It's these things: greater thermic effect of feeding, greater NEAT, even greater sleep energy expenditure. There's some interesting data showing that higher protein diets tend to promote more of a higher metabolism while you sleep, and it makes sense, I mean, because of the thermic effect. So the next question.
Stu Phillips, I think about 2 weeks ago, like he said about overfeeding in protein, like before you go to sleep, and you have better effects on the lean body mass when you sleep.
Yeah, and in fact, just giving that extra protein before you go to bed is a good strategy. Now, one of the questions that seems to pop up is the question of, is it safe? You know, is all this protein safe? Well, we actually, in this particular study, we actually looked at some blood work. And again, this is an 8-week study. And I focus here on kidney function, blood urea nitrogen, creatinine, glomerular filtration rate, or GFR, and then the BUN to creatinine ratio. And basically, nothing changes. So the criticism is, well, these are guys and girls who normally eat protein. It's only an 8-week study. I'm like, okay, yeah, 8 weeks, you're right. And they normally eat protein anyway, so of course, nothing wrong. Their kidneys, you wouldn't expect anything to go wrong. Okay, well, let's see what happens later on. So our conclusion from this study was that a high protein diet confers an advantage in terms of losing fat, drop in percent body fat. And it seems like if you eyeball the data, about 3 out of every 4 people seem to get an improvement in body composition, which is kind of cool. And what's interesting is performance doesn't always match body composition, and that's because performance oftentimes is more intimately tied to how you train. In fact, you can get an improvement in performance with no change in body composition. So there's those things that, you know, that sort of make the story a little bit more interesting. Now, let's go to the third question. What happens when you take only the most highly trained subjects, and these are all guys, and I put them on what I call a cyclic high-protein diet. So for 2 months, they're on the regular diet. For 2 months, they're on a high-protein diet, and then we alternate them for a year. This is just one of my subjects. We're acting kind of goofy. So we did a 1-year study. But we looked at the first 4 months of the study, and this was published in JISSN, the effects of a high-protein diet on indices of health and body comp. Now, what I'm going to show you here is 2 months habitual, and 2 months on a high-protein diet. What happens? Now, take a look at these numbers. Their habitual diet is already high. They're already around 2.3 or higher. Yep. So we're taking people who are already on a high-protein diet, and we're saying, okay, could you just eat a lot more? And they're like, yeah, sure. And in fact, a lot of my subjects who come in here, most of them, almost all of them are personal trainers. So they already track what they do. And to me, personal trainers oftentimes make the best subject because they want free protein, for one. They'll track, they're like, oh, it's sort of, yeah, I'm here, yeah. It's sort of like they're the ones who stand on the street saying, I will work for protein. So, that's them. So here's what happened. Again, remember, these are the same subjects. When you alternate from a normal protein to a higher protein diet, there's a trend towards a loss of fat mass. It's not statistically significant, but that's not the important story here. The important story is when you when you overfeed on protein, it's very hard to put on fat. And if anything, it doesn't seem to be it's energetically very costly to convert protein to fat. Your body would rather just burn it as fuel. Now, let's look at some individual data points. If you look at percent fat, you'll notice the trend lines all go down, right? When you look at fat mass, again, the trend lines, there's a few outliers, but the trend lines all go down. When you look at fat-free mass or lean body mass, you'll notice the trend lines all are pretty flat. They don't really change. There's a few outliers that go up. Yeah, so it's kind of interesting that, again, eating a lot of protein does not result in a gain in fat mass. So this is one of those things where I see so much of, if you eat too much carbs or fat or protein, you're going to store it as fat. Well, I think if you eat too much carbs and fat, you'll definitely store it as fat. We have that data. But if you just overeat on protein, you're probably not going to gain anything unless you change your training. And in that case, you'll gain muscle and perhaps lose fat. Now, we got some more safety data from this group. Again, this is 4 months of data. And you'll notice that the diet intakes, I just want to show you here that they're eating about 300 to 400 more calories, consuming 271 versus 212 grams of protein. And most importantly, we're comparing 3.3 grams per kilo to 2.6. So we're comparing high to really high, okay? Yep. High to really high. Now, here's the safety data. Glomerular filtration rate, to me the most important measure of kidney function. Nothing happens. Creatinine, nothing happens. Blood urea nitrogen, nothing happens. In fact, you can look at this whole chart. Look down here, AST and ALT, measures of liver function. Nothing happens. So nothing is happening. Now let's look at blood lipids. Nothing happens. In fact, their blood lipids are good. Total cholesterol is low. Yeah, it's like they look great. I mean, so what is it about, why do people hate protein so much and they think it'll harm you? And the answer is, I have no idea. Now, here's the case studies I think you're referring to. These two guys are awesome. They went up to 6.59 and 4.66. Yeah.
That's the one. Yep.
Yeah, this guy's great. If he goes to 4 grams per kilo, he's like, this is way too low for me. I got to be way above 4 grams per kilo. I'm like, oh my God. He goes through protein powder, the way a camel goes through water. It's crazy. But what we found is that GFR, nothing changes. Again, down here, GFR, nothing changes. They all remain within the normal range. And that's even though they're eating a lot of protein. Okay, a lot. Now, this is the fourth question. What happens after 1 year of a high-protein diet? 1 year. And this study was published in Journal of Nutrition and Metabolism. And this is what we found. So after 1 year, this is 1 year, they're eating 2.5 to 3.3 grams per kilo. Their blood lipids are clean. Nothing changes. And remember, and I don't know if you're too young to remember this, but I'm old enough to remember way back when people said, well, if you eat a high-protein diet, it increases your risk of cardiovascular disease. And I'm thinking, God, I haven't seen that data. Where's that data? And it doesn't exist. It just doesn't exist. So blood lipids are not. Yeah. Look at this, renal function, kidney function. I don't know if you can see the numbers are kind of small, but again, nothing changes. Creatinine, no change. GFR, no change. Bun to creatinine ratio, no change. Blood urea nitrogen, no change. Let's look at liver function, AST, ALT, no change. So this is what's interesting. So they were on this high protein diet for a year. Nothing happened in terms of health parameters. People, the biggest criticism was, well, how do you know nothing will happen in 2 years? What about 10 years? What about 20 years? I'm like, wow, someone has to do a 20-year study now? Holy crap. So there's always people who will never be satisfied. And to me, if nothing happens in 1 year, I'm like, then nothing's going to happen. I mean, what's going to suddenly happen? It's sort of like, imagine this. If you exercise train someone for a year and nothing happens, why would something happen in year 2? It's like, that means your exercise training program really sucks. So nothing happens. Now, here's one of my favorite subjects here, Stefano. He's the one who's consuming like 10 grams per kilo. Well, okay, 6 grams per kilo.
Oh my God, okay.
Yeah, he's a really fascinating guy because his personal story, I said, what got you into eating all this protein? And he said, well, actually, I used to be fat and I was depressed. This was like 4 or 5 years ago. Because, and he showed me pictures on Instagram. He's like, yeah, I was really kind of fat. And so I had to do something about it. So I said, what'd you do? He goes, I decided to lift weights and eat protein. I mean, as silly as that sounds, that's what he did. And he goes, absolutely. And fact, you got it. In fact, you hit the nail on the head. And he always tells me, he's like, Professor, protein saved my life, and lifting weights too. But protein saved my life. I'm like, well, I'm glad something saved your life. But now this is the best part. I love this, and you may have seen this already. This was his best day. He ate 1,055 grams of protein. And I'm thinking, holy smokes, look at this number down here at the bottom. 1,055 grams. Grams!
Okay.
I'm thinking, how many days would I need to eat that? And I'm thinking, wow, that's...
Exactly, that was oh my God.
Yes.
He needs just a fridge for his protein.
Now, if you start seeing what he eats, he goes through about 24 scoops of protein powder. 24! Now imagine that you go through 4 scoops of protein powder. You're like, wow, I'm done. That's all for me. He goes through 24. It's amazing.
And you just said this guy was like 5 years ago, right?
Yeah, he used to be fat and out of shape. And now he's ripped and eats protein. And he lifts a lot of weights.
I did a backup research about all your articles, plus some of Professor Stu Phillips, and everybody was saying about deamination and urea, and people that have kidney disease, that it creates problems, and they took that and created a dogma that if you have lots of protein, then you can have a problem. But then I saw research that said even with people that have kidney disease, yes, it increases urea, but doesn't create any problems.
Right, and in fact, what's interesting is that they may need to re-examine the amount of protein they give people with renal dysfunction, because if you start diminishing protein intake, it causes a different set of problems now.
And exactly, that's my segue to ask you, what's going to happen if you're not taking enough protein? Because everybody said, oh, if you're going to get enough protein, you're like kidney, bone density, Trump might be a president. Oh, shit, that happened. So what would happen if we have less protein than we need?
Well, if you're an athlete and you're a little low on protein, in fact, I was just having this conversation with a distance runner from the college I teach at, recovery becomes an issue, and you have a harder time recovering. If you're someone who's sick or ill, let's say in a hospital, and you don't eat enough protein, you're just going to waste away. I mean, it's one of those things, people don't realize that from a health standpoint, having lean body mass is a good thing just from a health standpoint. From an exercise standpoint, it's good in that the protein helps you recover. So if you're too low, and I see this a lot, mainly in endurance athletes, not really strength athletes, they just don't get enough protein. And part of it is they've never really been taught the value of it. And that's where, people like you and I, we got to teach people, carbs are important, yes. Fat's important, yes. But, and protein doesn't taste as good as apple pie. Yes, we know. But you still got to eat it, and it may be just important, if not more important than the other two macronutrients. So It's interesting. It's interesting, and like this guy here, Stefano, he's one of my favorite subjects. He's always talking about how he loves protein. But I also worked with this young lady, Victoria Burgess.
Hmm.
She, you might say, I would call this an ultra endurance event. It was a 32-mile stand-up paddling race from one island of Hawaii to the other. It's Molokai Island to Oahu. I don't know if any of you have been to Hawaii,
Uh,
um,
is that
but
an
it,
offer?
yes, Hawaii. I love Hawaii. It's my favorite place to
How
vacation.
long will it take for a 32 miles up? Just so we can.
6 hours.
Jesus.
Yeah, that's a
Okay.
6 hour race. Yeah. And this race is by
Gotcha.
invitation only because obviously if you don't know how to deal with the waves, you'll just drown. So we
Yeah.
don't want people drowning. So it's by invitation. It's by invitation only. And you can see what's cool about this picture, you notice half her body you can't see. And this picture was taken from the top of the chase boat. You have to have a chase boat near you. And that means the swells range from, I'm trying to think in meters, but I can't, 10 to 12 feet high, which is a lot of meters. I don't know how many meters, but it's high. And here's another picture showing how high the swells are. I mean, it's scary high out there. So if you've never been to Hawaii, it's like scary. Those waves are so high. So with her, what did I focus on? I bumped up her protein. Um, Carbs and fat, I'm like, you obviously don't have a problem eating carbs and fat, so I'm not even going to say anything. Just eat more protein, take some shakes. I had her on beta-alanine, HMB, caffeine, et cetera, et cetera. And her training was a combination of stand-up paddling, surfing, running, and weight training. Simple stuff. You can get someone who's a high-end athlete, give them simple advice, and it'll help them perform. So you don't have to be complicated. And I think in our field, people like to get all complicated with, it's like, give the simple stuff first. Believe me, the simple stuff will work. The basics always work. So I wanted to put here and there real quick just to show, even the elite of the elite will respond well to simple stuff. Now, I'm going to switch a little in terms of not just protein, but also issues of timing. And I think this is important because I think issues of nutrient timing have sort of gotten confused in the last year and a half. My thoughts are this, is ultimately your job, my job, is to give advice to athletes. It's not for you and I to have academic debates about whatever. I mean, we can have academic debates, but that ultimately solves nothing. Our goal is to give advice to athletes. So, when I think of nutrient timing, I always think of what is the most pragmatic piece of advice I could give. So I'm going to talk briefly about carbs, caffeine, and protein and show you how timing is important. Carbohydrate. We've known this since the 1970s. In fact, John Ivey did some of the cool work on carbohydrate metabolism. We know that if you consume carbs pre and or during exercise, it will improve performance. We've known that for years. That clearly is a nutrient timing issue. Oscar Eukendrup, he has some really cool pictures on his website, My Sport Science. I love his pictures.
Yeah. Me too. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, it's cool stuff, and you'll notice that depending on how long you compete endurance events, sometimes you need 30 grams per hour, 60 grams per hour, or even 90 grams per hour for carbs. Again, there's a timing issue. What about caffeine? Well, we know if you consume caffeine somewhat immediately pre-exercise or during, it helps performance. That's clearly, see, caffeine is my favorite drug, so I'm glad we're on the same page. So caffeine is a wonderful timing supplement. Now, it gets a little tricky with protein. And what's interesting about protein is acutely, and you're familiar with Stu Phillips's work, if you consume protein post-exercise or pre-exercise, you get a pretty good rise in muscle protein synthesis. That's the acute data. The chronic data is less clear. I think right now there's 3 studies, maybe at most, that show, 2 of them show an improvement, 1 doesn't show anything, and these are studies in trained people. Trained people. There's only 3. There's not more than 3.
There was Allen's and Brad Schoenfeld's research that it was a bit misunderstood. I think it was it was amazing research, but people got it the wrong way. I think.
Yes, because almost all the studies that were done on untrained people.
Exactly.
So, and from a practical standpoint, I've worked with untrained people in the past. It doesn't matter what you do. Everything kind of works because they're untrained. So you have to look at just the trained population, and there's only 3 studies that are involved. But even then, people have always thought of the post-workout window, the anabolic window, as like it's not a window, it's a garage door, it's this big, it's gigantic. But Rocco, I'm here to tell you that's not the right question to ask. That's maybe the second or third question to ask. The best question to ask is this: what can you possibly benefit, or what advantage can you possibly get by not eating post workout? And the answer to that is nothing. There's never an advantage to not eating post workout. So what do I tell athletes? I'm like, eat something post workout. Yeah, eat protein. Here's why: because it represents a chance to eat. And for instance, you're familiar with the data showing that after you lift weights, your muscles are somewhat sensitized for 24 to 48 hours. Let's say 1 to 2 days, roughly.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea is, okay, you have this gigantic window. Like, well, then I can wait 24 hours or whatever, 6 hours or 5 hours. It's the wrong way of looking at it. The best way of looking at it is, let's say you actually have 24 hours. Why don't you take advantage of every hour of the 24 hours? Oh, I mean, that makes sense to me. So particularly with large guys who are like playing American football or basketball, I mean, they're expending a lot of energy. The worst piece of advice you could give them is like, well, just eat 2 or 3 hours from now. It's like, no, eat now and then eat 2 or 3 hours from now. So I think we have to start looking at this from more of a practical or pragmatic standpoint. Because if we don't, then we sort of engage in these esoteric debates about, is it 1 hour post-workout? Is it 2 hours? Is it 3 hours? And it's like, it doesn't matter. You got to eat. It makes more sense to eat than to not eat. So that's I think how people should look at it. Now, so what the heck does this all mean? Some of the research I did on protein overfeeding and timing, etc. One, there's a lot of individual variability, but in general, about 3 out of every 4 subjects improve body composition when they eat a lot of protein. Another big point is that high protein diets, based on the current evidence, there's no harm. I have not seen any evidence of harm. And what's interesting is, people said, well, your study was just in guys. Well, what about girls? Because girls' kidneys, they must be different, right? Because the kidneys, so, which is silly. But you know what we're doing? And this was sort of a happenstance. We now have a DEXA in our lab, and we're actually going to, probably starting in January, we're going to do a 1-year study looking at protein intake in trained women and looking at bone mineral density, body composition. We're going to look at markers of inflammation like interleukin-6, interleukin-1b, C-reactive protein, and then also just look at your typical blood work to see what happens in trained women who eat a lot of protein for at least 6 months, 6 to 12 months. That way we can shut everyone up about, well, what happens in women?
Yeah.
And then what'll happen is we'll find nothing in women. They'll be like, well, what happens in 15-year-olds? It just keeps going and going. I mean, it's just kind of funny how it works that way. Now, I put this cartoon up here because I think it's kind of funny. Let me read it to you. So we'll be talking to Dr. Jenkins of the National Institute of Health about the results of his 3-year study. And then for a different take, we'll talk to Roger here, who I understand has reached the opposite conclusion just by sitting on his couch and speculating. And that's basically social media. People, they want to give you their opinion, and then you realize they've never done anything in this field, and I think they just feel a compelling need to give their opinion on whatever. So I thought that was funny. Now, the big picture. Be pragmatic. And it's funny, I had an interesting conversation with Laurent Bannock, that scientists, and even practitioners, they tend to be hyper-science-y. It's like, stop getting so science-y, be pragmatic, because our job is to help people who train, not to argue with each other. So you got to be pragmatic, number one. Number two, eating more than 3 grams per kilo may actually be a good thing. Number three, eating a high-protein diet is good. 1 year, no harmful effects. This one, this fourth bullet point, I have never had an athlete tell me, I just can't seem to eat enough carbs. Ever in my life. If someone says that, I want to meet that person because, I could eat apple pie, I could eat fried rice, I could eat ice cream. Carbs taste better than everything. So, of course, I'm going to eat all the carbs.
Yep.
And so my recommendation is the default macronutrient that athletes should consume is protein. Now, I do want to thank my research team, Dr. Tobin Silver, Dr. Corey Peacock, Anya Ellerbrook. She's helped me with a lot of this research. You might recognize him. He's a professional boxer, Chris Algieri, and he's actually been a subject in some of my studies. So they've been instrumental in helping me collect this data. And at this point, I'll take any questions that you and your students might have.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jose.
You're welcome.
I wanted to ask before I, big guy, you want to ask, right? Yes, you do. About metabolizing and absorbing. Are they the same, or because people are like, oh, okay, I can have like 300 grams of protein, but is that the amount I'm going to absorb, or is that the amount I'm going to metabolize?
Well, in a way, you can't separate them because if you're not absorbing it, it's coming out of your ass, right? And if you eat 100 grams of protein and people say, well, you can only absorb 30 grams, so what, 70 grams comes out your butt? Obviously not. Here's the thing, you absorb it all, but you oxidize most of it. I mean, once you use the protein for normal protein turnover, for repair of tissues, things like that, then what does it do with the rest? Well, it can't store it, so it has to oxidize it as fuel, and that's where you get the crazy thermic effect. Now, here's the question. Is there a limit? I mean, is there a physical limit upon which you eat so much that you literally don't absorb it and you just expel it?
Mm-hmm.
I would imagine there is, but how much is that? I don't know. I mean, a 300-pound guy or a 150-kilo guy will be much different than a 50-kilo girl. But we don't know what that limit is. But we do know this, that if you're eating what most people eat per meal, between 40 to 100 grams of protein, you're absorbing it all. The question is, how do you metabolize it?
Exactly.
And if you don't use it for normal muscle protein turnover or tissue turnover, you're oxidizing it as fuel.
Exactly. Because
Yeah.
the supplement companies started the whole fad, like saying you need 30 grams every 2-3 hours, because there was a research.
And that matches the scooper.
Yeah. And your guy has like 25 scoops a day. But
Right.
they were saying because you can metabolize around 10 grams of amino acids, and that's not true, because in one meal I can have like 100 grams of protein just
Right.
breakfast.
Right. Exactly. I mean, and from purely a practical standpoint, if you're dealing with a very large male athlete, he can't get all his protein intake from 1 or 2 meals a day. He actually has to eat frequently throughout the day just to hit his protein intake. So it doesn't make sense that the human body has that kind of limit. And also the other thing, which people, I think people sort of forget, that our field is one of integrative biology or physiology. And if you look at it from purely what I would call a teleological standpoint, prehistoric man, the way they would consume food, particularly in parts of Northern Europe, would probably be they would gorge when they had food because they didn't know when they would be starving.
Exactly.
And the only food you could gorge on would be animals. You can't. I don't know if you could gorge on nuts. Is that possible? I don't know. But if you kill an animal, you're like, you know what? I don't. Yeah, exactly. I don't know when we're going to catch another deer, so we're going to eat till we're going to blow up. So humans must have the ability to consume large amounts of protein and fat from animals and do fine. Otherwise, we would have died as a species a long time ago.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Guys, questions?
Okay, so let me repeat the question. Does it have to do with meat that has, did I hear glycerin? I didn't quite hear it.
Glycine.
Oh, glycine. What do I think of the amino acid glycine?
Yep.
Well, glycine is a fairly, innocuous amino acid. I'm not aware of any data that it has any special properties per se. I'm not sure that's the question you're actually asking, and I apologize if I'm not answering it correctly. I would imagine getting enough of the essential amino acids would be priority, and I know glycine is not an essential amino acid, but as far as the specifics of that, I probably couldn't really comment more than that. Well, in the studies I've done, all of the subjects actually not only eat a lot of protein, but they actually eat a lot of fat and carbs. So they're actually not on and here's the funny part. I call these studies high protein diet studies, but they're actually protein supplementation studies, because none of them are low carbing and none of them are low in fat. So they're actually getting plenty of fat, plenty of carbs, and eating a lot of protein. So I'm not familiar with data on people dying. If someone could send me that study, I'd like to read it, but I've never seen anything where high protein intakes in any healthy human being causes death ever.
Dr. Antonio, thank you very much for your time.
Hey, thank you.
I just want to tell you about because lots of students are interested about ISSN,
Okay.
and we were going to try and bring also Lauren Bannock. Maybe he can come here in person. We're gonna have a talk about the toolbox. He's amazing
Yeah.
talking about the tools a practitioner needs. And I
Yes.
believe that for every person that's in the health industry, especially with training with athletes or even in rehab, you need to go through the ISSN diploma.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And again, we have conferences there at least every other year, and in London, also in Dublin, Ireland. I don't know how far you are from Dublin, Ireland, but can't be that far because all those countries are little.
Yeah.
I think for me, going from Miami to Atlanta, Georgia, is like you going to Germany or something. It's really close. Yeah,
Okay. Waiting for
big
pictures
country.
from sunny Florida.
You'll
And
get some.
and I will see you in person in June in Arizona, right?
Yes, and hey, you know what? Be prepared for the heat because it will be hot. Um,
Greek
and
guy. Greek guy.
remember, I'm sure your cardio is on point, but there's a mountain. There's a mountain near the hotel
Okay.
that we're going to go one early morning, probably Sunday morning. We're going to hike the mountain and run back down.
Okay. We're not running up, so running down sounds perfect.
No, we're not running up. That's
I'm
way
gonna
too
buy
hard. But
beers.
exactly. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
I actually got to go to the lab. We're actually, you might be interested in this. We're doing some genotyping. We're looking at the gene for speed in a bunch of.
Alphactin 3.
Yep, alpha-actinin 3. We're actually testing a bunch of fighters from the Black Zillion gym in South Florida. A bunch of mixed martial arts guys.
Awesome.
So
It's called that. It's the performance gene, but we're still waiting for data, right?
yeah, we're still waiting. So we got to go through a bunch of athletes and see what we can find. So,
Okay.
but thank you, and I hope you guys enjoy the beautiful weather in the UK.